Presented by Data E.
Welcome to Side Pocket 2. Actually, before we do that, we're going to Minnesota Fat's Pool Legend. Yes, the original Genesis version of Side Pocket 2 that everybody's familiar with here in the States, while Japan got the best end of the stick with the Saturn release, Legend of the Hustler. And the game actually does vary depending on which version that you have, so that's why this channel will have both versions played. So we're going to start off with Side Pocket 2 MD, Minnesota Fat's Pool Legend as it's known here in the States, which basically follows the story of Minnesota Fats, or at least you trying to work your way up to have the ability of pool gaming as Minnesota Fats does. Now, fun fact, the photos that you see in the background are actual photos of Rudolph Wanderone in past years. I think photos from like his, maybe when he was in his 30s and 50s. Either way, when he was utmost notable in early era pool. Fun times for the good man. Although, to my knowledge, he's never officially won, like, a major championship. However, he is part of the reason why pool ended up becoming the way it is nowadays. And unfortunately, the game isn't covered enough. We don't play it as much as we would love to. At least here in this, lovely state of Massachusetts. So, what is this game? What is Minnesota Fat's Pool Legend, better known as Side Pocket 2 elsewhere? Well, MFPL basically is what you think it is. It's basically pool. Except, in terms of the way it is played, it's not the same as it is in the first Side Pocket title. What it is instead is a title that is meant to show off how competitive you can be against your opponents. What skills can you use to sink the balls in quick succession, whether you're playing 8-ball or 9-ball, or rotation, 14.1 continuous, better known as straight pool, single pocket, you name it. And in the case of story mode, you basically have to work your way up the chain. So you're taking on Dixie Wilson here, who I think, yeah, her name gets a massive name change. I think it's, I don't even remember what it is in the Saturn version. But they actually used real people for the cast of this title. It's not just Minnesota Fats in the Saturn version, it's also real people in this game, but with obvious name changes. I mean, heck, Slim Pickens. Slim Pickens is a player in this game. Or is it Stubby? It's Stubby, but I've always called him Slim Pickens since the first time I played this title, so that's why I've had to consider it as such. And for story mode exclusively, you're only going to be dealing with two different games here. You're dealing with 8-ball and you're dealing with 9-ball. Here, right now, you're seeing me deal with 9-ball, in which basically you have to sink in every other ball in rotation, and then once the 9-ball is free, the only ball left, you can pocket it. Alternatively, what you can do here is, if you know how to do proper ball chaining, hit the required ball, and somehow manage to make a way to chain the 9-ball into the pocket to give yourself an automatic win. In fact, I think I actually do it here in round 2. I'm going to have to double check that. But there's just so many ways that you can mess around with the ball this time around that I don't even know if the experience can be considered the same as the original 1986 Side Pocket. Bear in mind, this game took 9 years to make. Side Pocket 2 took 9 years to be a sequel to the first title. That's gotta be like some kind of record for the time. I mean, heck, it took 15 years for us to get Final Fantasy III here in the States, but that's a totally different story. I mean, at least that game was still getting sequels in Japan before we actually ended up getting 7 and other titles along that later on down the way. But no, Side Pocket just never really got the sequel treatment that it rightfully deserved. I mean, there's only so many ways you can recreate pool. I mean, Side Pocket 3 kind of almost gets it right, but the only issue that it has is that it's too much of 3D for comfort. Carom Shot 2 is also guilty of this. But I'll get to Carom Shot 2 when we get to Carom Shot 2. I don't want to complain about a good 3D pool game before we actually play it. Yeah, I know what I'm saying. Also, if I could say, the music in this game is just lovely. I think this is a custom Data East sound driver that they're using. This does not sound at all like SNPS, and definitely not Gems. The notes that you're hearing right now for the main melody of whatever track this is, I don't know the names of the tracks in this game. But, yeah, this track uses an instrument that is basically a heavily downed brass 1 if you're using the DX7, which it sounds... This sound converts very well into YM21280, into OPM and OPS format. Yes, apparently the YM2151 can also emulate the same sound. Who would have thought? But back to this game. If there's anything else I could really mention about the way that this game functions, the biggest change to the way that Minnesota Fats Pool Legend / Side Pocket 2 handles, as opposed to the first Side Pocket, or at least the Genesis 1992 version, is the matter of the fact that the physics are significantly improved. There's better traction control. There is so much better of everything. I mean, don't get me wrong, you still control the pool ball. You still control the ball in the same fashion. You still got your center, you got your drawback, you got your left and right English, you got your masse, you got your jumping. That's all fine and dandy. But the biggest difference is that the ball, I mean, it doesn't feel like you're trying to play against the board. I mean, against the table. And it doesn't feel as if you're trying to play against the ball either. You're actually having an easy time trying to sink in balls because Data East managed to optimize the physics roughly, and I'm not surprised that it took roughly 3 years to do this. I'm not upset that they took 3 years. I'm glad that they took the time to actually dedicate themselves to make an optimal title out of this. Is that in... Oh, right, yeah, in 8-Ball, I might as well mention this. 8-Ball has a different method in the way that it's handled here. I think these are Vegas rules, or... I'm not sure. But when you have an open table means you can sink in any balls you want, with the exclusion of the 8-Ball. If you sink in the 8-Ball before you deal with either solids or stripes, that's considered a foul. You lose the round. But in terms of the way the open table works, this varies depending on your game. If you are playing the Genesis version, what happens is, you sink in both a solid and a stripe, you have to choose between that. You have to choose either solids or you have to choose to sink in stripes. In the Saturn version, you don't have to worry about that. In 8-Ball on the Saturn, you can basically sink solids and stripes together. It will never ask you if you want to have strictly solids or strictly stripes. You can sink all 14 balls and then deal with the 8-Ball. That is how simplified the Saturn version is as opposed to this. In fact, I believe that that makes the game significantly easier than the Genesis version just because of that alone. And also, more or less, because the Saturn version story mode is strictly 8-Ball only, I guess in terms to increase the gameplay flow, in a sense, I think it made better sense for them to do what they did. It feels right. It feels proper. Definitely feels far easier and more bearable, I'm sure, for a lot of players. But not for the CPU. We love to duck over the CPU in that game. But speaking of the computer players, oh man. Now you see this screen here. You got Jay Lewis. Jay Lewis is currently, he's thinking. He's trying to look for a good shot. I have had instances in this game where, you know, you can have, like, one of the higher level, hard level opponents, right? And they'll be thinking for a good 2 minutes and change. The best analogy that I can probably make to that is how Clement felt when he had to fight Gate in Rockman X6, Mega Man X6, where Gate literally was just, he was just moving left and right for about 2.5 minutes straight, or maybe more than that. Either way, that is the greatest way to kill flow in a game. I am very fortunate that Data East made up for that with the Saturn version. Your opponents won't take as long to think in the Saturn version as they will in the Genesis and Megadrive version. I don't know if what is going on there is lag, or if it's something else, because when I'm looking at the frame counter here. The frame counter, whenever they're thinking, it's always white. That means that no frames are dropped. There's no lag frames. So what's really going on there? What is the whole programming sense of this title when it comes to wait times? But then again, I guess just like the game of pool itself, Pocket Billiards, or even Carom Billiards for that matter, it's truly just a waiting game. Because you're basically thinking, how many angles do you need to do? How much power do you need? What are you going to hit next? It's a literal depiction of what is actually to be expected from a regular pool game. So it doesn't sound so far-fetched when I think of it. Which is kind of nice. It's kind of nice. Reasonable, but nice nonetheless. But it can make people have their questions. And also, given the nature of this rendition of 8-Ball, the biggest problem you're going to have is calling your shot. Now, this is where it can really get bad. Because if you accidentally hit the ball into the wrong pocket, it is considered a foul and you lose the game. Doesn't matter which version. On the Genesis version, it's worse because if you can lose many rounds that way, I mean, you have a very limited amount of continues in this. I think you only have like 2 or 3. I think the Saturn version also has 2 or 3, but you have an easier way of surviving in that game, and you're gonna understand why I say that once we get to the Saturn version. But survival in this game survival in the Genesis version can be a chore. It can be a chore, and especially if you're not good against the opponents. If you're not good at keeping the ball in your control, you will probably see that game over screen a lot. It's not an easy task. Truly isn't. So the best way I could say to handle this is to take your time. That's the best way I could say to handle this game in any way, shape, and form. Although, if I could also mention, official major pool tournaments from the 2000s, they basically had implemented the rule where you only have like a certain amount of time to shoot the ball. I think it's about, I want to say 30. It's either 30 or 60 seconds. Each player is granted 1 timeout per round. Or at least that's how it is in 7-Ball. I'm not sure if that's how it is in others. The timeout basically gives you an extra amount of time. I think you get like an extra 45 or something seconds in order to be able to make your decision. And that's it. If you take too long in an official tournament, it's rendered, I think, as a scratch, and your opponent basically takes over. He or she takes over control. You could never see me do official tournament rules. I would have to work on novice standards. It's not because I don't like the challenge. is just because I don't want to have to challenge myself more than I have to. I feel that it's better to take as much time as you necessarily need. I mean, heck, when ESPN was covering pool tournaments back in the 2000s, even if a game went on for so long, at least they kept it going. Especially if were any of those recorded live? I want to say a good amount of them were recorded live. Yeah, they were recorded live. Yeah, I remember. I remember those games were recorded live to the point in which they would skip games, skip rounds. But that's actually something that dates back to, I want to say, the mid-'80s. Because I forget when it was. It was like 85, 1986. Actually, Minnesota Fats himself was in that particular tournament I'm talking about. It was Masters of Pool. I think it was Masters of Pool 3? 2 or 3. And they would basically show, a few rounds, right? They'd show off a few rounds of a certain game, whether it be 7-ball or 8-ball or 9-ball. There's even 10-ball too. And, they'd go to commercial. But they're still playing. Bear that in mind. They still play rounds as they keep going through. While the commercial breaks are going on. I could never understand that. That never made sense to me. Oh, there's a scratch. So if you get a scratch, basically what happens is if they got a scratch, or your opponent, if you got one, you can basically place the ball wherever you want. However, it all depends on the way that the scratch happened, and also depending on, I think, game rules. So in this sense, what basically happens is, in certain regards, you can place the ball wherever you want. You'll have ball in hand during that time, but there are certain instances where, like, you can only use like the whole right third of the table, and oh my goodness, could you please hit the ball? Oh, I love my gameplay. I love my gameplay. I take my time. Now, standard disclaimer, I intentionally scratched there, and for good reason. I didn't have a good shot. I did not have a good angled shot. I tried many different angles. That's why I took as long as I did. And what you're gonna see here is, that was a close one. But I knew that Lewis wouldn't be able to hit it, so that's why I said, might as well throw it away, because I knew that I'd be able to hit it the next time around, and that is what happens here. Now, also, another standard disclaimer. If you scratch your cue ball, that is rendered as a foul in this game, for some odd reason. I can't understand that. I honestly don't. Doesn't make sense to me. I don't know, maybe it's just because of the rules that are put in. I can't be sure. I don't work on most rule sets when it comes to pool. Regulation is its own thing, Vegas is its own thing, Texas is its own thing. Simulation is its own thing. Novice is its own thing. Hello, Mr. Wilkins. Oh, lovely, lovely red table. Now, I'll be truthful, the only time that I ever want to see a red pool table is, like, if I'm in some upper-class high roller area. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure that a lot of people love the wood and red tables, but I personally prefer black and red. Why do I prefer black and red if I'm gonna get a red table? It's just because black blends well with red. Brown doesn't. I mean, don't get me wrong. It depends on the shade of brown. If you have a good shade of brown, maybe it's gonna look good. But, I can see, this shade of brown is mixed with a bit of peach, bit of apricot. Yes, I'm referring to Crayola colors. Speaking of Crayola colors, how many times am I going to do speaking of in this? My goodness. But speaking of Crayola colors, there was a long time where I just had a fun time just taking a box of, 96 variant, or even a special 100 color variant Crayola colors box, crayons box in, what one was that? 2003, 2004? I want to say, late 03 going into 04. And I just happen to always remember every single color that I could get my hands on. Heck, it's one of the only reasons why I still consider light blue to be known as Periwinkle, which is a heavily desaturated bright blue. That's all it is. But Periwinkle just has a better sound to it than light blue. Yes, I know light blue just sounds faster to say, but what can I truly say? I just love the sound. Actually, speaking of which, let's see, now in Blue's Clues, I honestly forget, Blue's Clues turns 20, actually, it turned 20 earlier this year. But I remember, I think this was taking place, either on March 14 or 15, one of those days in 2010. I remember I brought up the color Periwinkle. I remember Ashley had said that it was some shade of pink. And she basically brought up a certain character from Blue's Clues. I thought that the character that she was referring to, however, was known as Magenta. Because I recall a character in Blue's Clues that was pink. It was a pink dog that I assume whose name was Magenta. I'd have to go back and double check that. Yeah, I'll have to do my research after this commentary is over, but that's indeed something that I was wondering about for the longest time. I'm like, no, I know what I'm saying. Periwinkle is a light shade of blue. If I knew it was a shade of pink, I would have said it, but still. Amazing to know I can still think of those kind of things nowadays. Who would have thought? Is that it? Did I really just end this? Oh, okay. So we're at the end of the part. Yeah, this story mode is only 6 levels long, so, yeah, only makes sense for me to stop part 1 at the end of the 3rd round. Makes sense. So we'll see you next time for part 2. Oh, wait, how many times am I gonna do this to myself? This is a bulk set. If you are viewing this from the playlist, just hit the next button. You'll see part 2 right away. Oh, by the way, apparently we actually had a blooper happen off screen. While I was recording this, I guess a car just honked out of nowhere. Here's basically what happened. Here's the event of that in full.
Presented by Data E.
Welcome to Side Pocket 2. Actually, before that, we're gonna take a... Really? Okay! Car horn just blares out of nowhere while I'm trying to do a commentary. Oh, that's going to the blooper reel at the end of this episode.